RetroDaze.
3 months ago, we started a mini-series about board games, starting with standard board games and following it up 2 months later with an episode about electronic board games. We decided we wouldn't make you wait another 2 months for the final installment of the foundational trilogy of board game episodes, partly because that'd be super mean of us, but mostly because we were too excited to wait. Why are we so excited? Well, because this final installment is all about VHS board games, which tend to be some of the most interesting and overlooked of all the main categories. Today, however, we'll remember them in vivid detail. So if you have a VCR, it's time to hook that sucker up, preferably to a CRT TV, and hit play on VCR Board Games of Yesteryear. VCR games were a curious blip on the entertainment radar, made possible partly by the video game crash of 1983. Around that time, Parker Brothers was looking for something to compete with the Atari, but game designer Isabelle Garrett had another idea. As recounted by Garrett in the documentary Who Did It?, the Clue VCR game, during a meeting at Parker Brothers in 1984, she said, "You know, the most popular machine hooked up to the family television actually isn't the Atari, it's this VCR that everybody is getting. Why don't we do interactive videotape games?" She continues,
"So when the meeting was over and the suits thought about what we had come up with, they called me into their office and said, well, of all the ideas that came out of that meeting, we liked yours with the VCR thing. And they said, well, you know, couple of things. Could you base it on Clue? Because mysteries are in now and we already own Clue." "Oh yeah, great, sure." Get the presentation ready. And I said, "There's 2 things I need before I do that. First of all, could we please play Clue? Because I've never played it." "Okay. And could somebody tell me how a VCR works?"
As pointed out by Brian Van Hooker from Mel Magazine, it certainly didn't hurt that the movie Clue had also been in production the same year. This confluence of circumstances, from the extreme popularity of the VCR to the drop in video game sales to the release of a Clue movie, all resulted in huge sales for the game, despite what many people would call a high level of difficulty in gameplay. According to the designer Phil Orbans, the game notably sold several 100,000 copies and became an incredibly popular purchase for that year's Christmas season. But even the actors who played the iconic characters for the VCR game admitted to either having never played the game or finding the game too difficult to play.
Which I have no clue how to play, but so I'm in Clue and no clue.
I have to confess I have never played the game. Never, ever, once. I dare say there were plenty of people who made up their own rules.
I was invited to a Clue party, and I didn't know any of the clues, having been in the room, having been on the set with the clues, all of the candlesticks, the poison, the gun, you name it. I couldn't get one, not anything right.
My brother bought Clue, and he called me up. He said, "How do you do this game?" I said, "I don't know, I just made it."
Actually, I tried to play the game when it came out, and it was difficult. People were just learning how to have a VCR in their living room.
You had to shuffle the tape back and forth and kind of slop your way back and forth through it. It was very revolutionary in its concept, but the technology really wasn't good enough at the time to fulfill the dream.
On YouTube, Isabella Garrett herself stopped by to respond to a commenter saying, "I'm so glad to hear from someone who didn't think the game was too hard. It wasn't. Delighted that you had fun with it and enjoyed the logic of elimination challenge." I tend to agree that the game wasn't only ahead of its time regarding technology, but also in terms of gameplay, which by today's standards, from the perspective of advanced and in-depth tabletop gaming, would probably be considered perfectly reasonable. Garrett finished her comment by revealing, "Here's a scoop no one knows. In order to get a green light on the project, I had to write and direct and edit a test version using PB employees and filmed in a local mansion over the weekend. When it was done, we held a formal focus group with people who regularly play board games, not affiliated with the company, play testing it. The first test run ended with someone solving the case but incorrectly identifying the player's suspects. Something no one ever thought would happen. OMG, now what? My game was threatened. I thought up the suspense round right there on the spot to fix the glitch. The second round worked perfectly, and the rest, as they say, was mystery. Garrett's idea opened the gaming industry to a flood, albeit short-lived, of VCR games, many others of which were also recreations of pre-existing properties, like Clue. It was a trend we saw in our dissection of electronic board games as well, taking a board game that was already popular and creating a new version of it. Such was the case with the Candyland VCR board game, released in 1986 by Milton Bradley, though it wasn't your standard recreation. Instead, it came with 4 different games on the tape, including color-matching games Who's Been Eating My House and Lord Licorice's Surprise, as well as 2 picture-matching games, Lonely Old King Candy and Don't Say Fluffy Puffer. Fluffy Puffer. Fluffy Puffer. Fluffy Puffer. Moving on. Chutes and Ladders was another children's game from Milton Bradley to make the leap to your VCR. Like Candyland, we again have a story-guided matching game using the imagery of chutes and ladders with only some of the original gameplay mechanics. There was also the Star Trek Edition VHS add-on for Trivial Pursuit, released in the UK in 1995. The Telstar Video Entertainment product came with a VHS tape of over 100 Star Trek clips, a game booklet with hundreds of questions, and a category card. The way the game was set up, you could easily play with or without the original Trivial Pursuit board. Another area board game manufacturers liked to mine for ideas was popular movies and television. They knew anyone on the fence regarding the whole VCR board game trend might be persuaded if their favorite franchise was featured. These are like the Star Trek add-on for Trivial Pursuit, only as new, standalone games. In a recent episode, we talked about how the R-rated movie RoboCop was so popular that they decided to make a cartoon out of it despite the source material's mature content. Well, they didn't stop there. There were also the toys, video games, and yes, a VCR game. The front of the box exclaims, "Uses actual movie footage," but you have to search for the small sticker on the back of the box for the disclaimer, based on the hit R-rated movie, edited to be suitable for ages 12 and above. This really speaks to the sentiment at the time, which we established in the R-rated movies to cartoons video, that most didn't seem to have any issues taking mature content and repackaging it for a younger audience. It's funny to watch the edited scenes on the tape. During gameplay, you would fast forward until you see the corresponding letter code from the board, and knowing that when the tape says "record and arrest," in the actual movie, RoboCop had just murdered someone. The scenes on the tape cut away before anyone actually dies, though there are plenty of violent depictions because, well, this is RoboCop we're talking about. While not nearly as violent, the VCR WrestleMania game from 1988 is another that relies on the popularity of a pre-existing franchise. Essentially, this game plays out as matches where you strive to win the championship belt. Different actions during the game can result in you moving forward, though illegal moves can result in your opponent having to move backwards. If they're pushed all the way back to the locker room, well, they lose. There's a lot more to it, but I'm going to go out on a limb and assume you don't want me to sit here and read the full instructions to you. The game tape is full of 15-second clips from random wrestling matches, only some of which are actually from WrestleMania, and none of which are newly recorded content for the game. It goes without saying, but you'd have to be a pretty huge WWF fan to enjoy this one. Then there was the Wayne's World VCR board game from 1992, which is totally a Wayne's World VCR board game. What I mean is, if you're a fan of the SNL sketches and movies, you're sure to enjoy this game. If not, then you might want to skip it. The video portion is made up of interactive clips featuring Mike Myers and Dana Carvey, shot specifically for the game, which is frankly pretty cool.
Remember, if time runs out before one of you spinktoids reaches Party Central, I win. Party on, Wayne.
Party on, Garth.
If you're a big enough fan to want to buy the game in the first place, it's pretty neat to get some new content from the main actors. Besides recreations of existing games and reliance on popular franchises, there was also loads of interesting original content coming out during the VCR game boom. Perhaps the best known of these was Nightmare, known as Atmosphere in regions outside the US. This horror-based game tends to be one of the most commonly discussed among retro fans due to the creepy gatekeeper who leads you through the timed game in your attempt to collect 6 character keys and get to the center of the board.
the game?
Nightmare, the game hosted by a video.
I am the gatekeeper!
To win, you must stop it.
Roll the dice!
The video board game Nightmare. The gatekeeper talks to you.
Whose turn is it next?
And you must answer him.
Answer me!
Yes, my gatekeeper.
Go for it!
Nightmare, a race against time for 3 to 6 very game players.
Let's party!
See? What's not to like, except perhaps the limitations of the VHS component. But at the time, it was just something we accepted because it's not like we had an alternative. The Australian-based game first came out in 1991 and sold 2 million copies after 2 years, resulting in 3 game expansions, a new title in 1995 called The Harbingers, a 2004 DVD game release called The Gatekeeper, and a second DVD game in 2006 entitled Khufu the Mummy, making the Atmosphere series perhaps the most enduring of all the VHS board games. There were even 2 fairly recent releases, the first of which was an app-based version of the 2004 game with a few modifications. The second was a Kickstarter project billed as the 30th Anniversary Edition and released in 2023. Another VCR game that took advantage of the horror genre was the 1986 game Doorways to Horror.
Our family had the toughest time making friends. Then we bought Pressman's new video cassette game, Doorways to Horror. Now we have lots of friends, right, Mummy? Doorways to Horror is what you play along with famous Hollywood film monsters. It really takes brains. It's the VCR game you can really sink your teeth into, and they love it too. And as for monsters, Pressman's new video cassette game, Doorways to Horror. It's so much fun, it's scary. Also look for Doorways to Adventure.
This one appeared to lean heavily into the popularity of Universal monsters, though once you got the game opened, you realize all the creatures were generic and only suggestive of the official Universal monsters. There were characters like witch, werewolf, vampire, zombie, and monster, though you may spy a recognizable face or two in the movie clips on the VHS tape. While not as effective as the Atmosphere series with, well, you know, atmosphere, you still get some solid creepy vibes while playing this one. By the time Parker Brothers was coming out with Clue 2, Murder in Disguise VCR mystery game in 1987, the consumer landscape had already started to change. Notably, the video game crash that had given VCR games a foothold in the market in the first place was all but over, what with the Nintendo Entertainment System's official American nationwide release on September 27, 1986. By 1987, the NES was on its way to market dominance, and the country's perception of video games had started to shift dramatically. Though fewer VCR board games were made past 1988, they were still being made, with the last one perhaps being the X-Files trivia game in 1997. It was right around this time that DVDs began their takeover of at-home entertainment media, and by the early 2000s, DVD board games hit the market with titles like Seen It, Hitstory, new editions of Trivial Pursuit, further Atmosphere installments, and many more. With more than 72 VCR board games made through the 90s, narrowing down the list to only a few was as hard as ever, but also reassured us that this is a topic we absolutely must revisit. Heck, we've even already started our list for the next video with Dino Land, Gargoyles the movie game, Isaac Asimov's Robots VCR mystery game, Myth, and the only briefly mentioned X-Files trivia game. But as always, we'll pull as many suggestions as we can from the comments section. So tell us, what are some of the VCR board games that we missed? What are your favorites and, more interestingly, your least favorites? I'd love to hear about it down in the comments. And if you enjoy our content, please consider liking this video, subscribing to the channel, and maybe even activating that ubiquitous notification bell. It really does make a huge difference. Let's meet again next week to celebrate Yesteryear, right here on RetroDaze.
Clicky clacky.